What happens when the same sacred symbols appear across every continent, every culture, every spiritual tradition throughout human history, even when these civilizations had no contact with each other? Does this suggest a universal language of consciousness that transcends time, space, and human limitation? Welcome, soul traveler, to the Eternal Library. Today we dive into one of the most profound and enigmatic revelations that has been hidden in plain sight for millennia. The true meaning behind every religious symbol that has ever been carved in stone, painted on cave walls, or whispered in the sacred halls of temples across our planet. What I'm about to share with you will forever change how you see crosses, crescents, wheels, triangles, and every sacred geometry that surrounds us daily, for these are not mere decorations or arbitrary designs created by ancient peoples. They are maps, soul traveler, living blueprints that encode the deepest secrets of consciousness, the architecture of reality itself, and the pathways to divine awakening that our ancestors discovered through direct mystical experience and then preserved in symbols so powerful that they could survive the collapse of civilizations, the burning of libraries, and the systematic suppression of esoteric knowledge by those who feared the liberation of human consciousness. The journey we're about to embark upon begins in the caves of Lascaux, France, where 40,000 years ago our ancestors painted not just animals and hunting scenes, but precise geometric patterns that modern researchers like Dr. Genevieve von Petzinger have documented as appearing in over 400 caves across Europe, the same patterns that would later emerge independently in the Aboriginal Dreamtime symbols of Australia, the petroglyphs of Native American shamans, the yantra designs of Hindu Tantra, the mandala wheels of Tibetan Buddhism, and the sacred geometry of Islamic architecture. What were these early humans trying to communicate? According to neuroscientist Dr. David Lewis Williams in his groundbreaking work on the neuropsychological basis of shamanic art, these symbols represent the universal structures of consciousness itself, the geometric patterns that appear when the human brain enters altered states through meditation, plant medicines, sensory deprivation, or extreme spiritual practices. The cross, perhaps the most recognizable symbol in human history, appears not just in Christianity but in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs as the ankh, in Hindu and Buddhist traditions as the swastika before its corruption by fascism, in Native American medicine wheels, in Celtic cross designs, in ancient Chinese feng shui as the intersection of yin and yang, and even in the molecular structure of DNA itself as the four bases that create all life. But what does the cross really mean? The Hermetic tradition, as preserved in the works of Hermes Trismegistus and later interpreted by alchemists like Paracelsus and John Dee, reveals that the cross represents the intersection of the horizontal plane of matter and the vertical axis of spirit, the precise point where finite consciousness meets infinite awareness, where the human soul transcends the limitations of three-dimensional reality and touches the eternal. The vertical line, according to the Kabbalistic tree of life as taught by mystics like Isaac Luria and Moses Cordovero, represents the flow of divine energy from the highest spiritual realms down into physical manifestation, while the horizontal line represents the expansion of consciousness across all dimensions of existence. This is why Jesus, in the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas discovered at Nag Hammadi, speaks of stretching out his hands to encompass all of creation. He was describing the consciousness that extends infinitely in all directions while remaining rooted in the divine source above and the earthly vessel below. The ancient Egyptians understood this so profoundly that they placed the ankh, their version of the cross with the circle of eternity at the top, in the hands of every deity as the key of life, for they knew that this symbol contained the secret of how consciousness creates reality through the intersection of divine will and material manifestation. The circle, found in every spiritual tradition from the Buddhist wheel of Dharma to the Celtic sacred groves to the medicine wheels of indigenous peoples, represents the eternal nature of consciousness that has no beginning and no end. But more than that, according to the research of mathematician and philosopher Arthur M. Young, author of The Geometry of Meaning, the circle represents the fundamental pattern of all learning, all evolution, all spiritual development, where consciousness. moves through 7 distinct stages from pure potential through increasing complexity and back to unity with greater wisdom and power. This is why the Buddha chose the wheel with 8 spokes to represent his teachings. Each spoke represents one aspect of the Noble Eightfold Path, but the wheel itself represents the continuous cycle of death and rebirth, karma and liberation, ignorance and enlightenment that every soul must navigate on its journey toward ultimate realization. The Sufis, in their ecstatic whirling ceremonies developed by Jalaluddin Rumi and his followers, understood that by spinning their bodies in circles they could align their personal energy field with this cosmic pattern and achieve direct union with divine consciousness, what they called dying before you die. The triangle, appearing in Christian imagery as the all-seeing eye, in Hindu yantras as the sacred fire of transformation, in Jewish mysticism as the 3 pillars of the tree of life, in Egyptian pyramids as the perfect geometric form for channeling cosmic energy, and in Native American teepees as the connection between earth and sky, encodes within its 3-sided structure the fundamental law of manifestation that the ancient Hermeticists called as above, so below. But why 3? According to the Pythagorean teachings preserved by Iamblichus and later revived by Renaissance mages like Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola, the number 3 represents the first stable structure in creation, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, the process by which the divine mind creates reality through the interplay of opposites resolved in a higher unity. The upward-pointing triangle, as taught in the tantric traditions of Kashmir Shaivism by masters like Abhinavagupta and Uppaladeva, represents the masculine principle of consciousness ascending toward spirit, while the downward-pointing triangle represents the feminine principle of energy descending into matter. And when these 2 triangles intersect they create the 6-pointed Star of David, which appears not only in Jewish mysticism but in Hindu mandalas as the Shatkona, in Islamic art as the Seal of Solomon, and in alchemical texts as the union of fire and water, the marriage of opposites that creates the philosopher's stone of enlightened consciousness. The spiral, perhaps the most ancient symbol of all, carved into megalithic stones at Newgrange in Ireland over 5,000 years ago, painted on pottery by the Anasazi peoples of the American Southwest, incorporated into Celtic art as the triple spiral or triskele, found in the double helix of DNA, in the structure of galaxies, in the chambers of the Nautilus shell, and in the Kundalini serpent that yogis speak of as coiled at the base of the spine, represents what modern physicists in consciousness. Researcher Amit Goswami calls the quantum leap, the way consciousness moves not in straight lines but in evolutionary spirals, always returning to the same issues but at higher levels of understanding and integration. The ancient Chinese understood this as the Tao, the way that flows like water but always moves upward toward greater harmony and balance, while the Aboriginal Australians mapped these spiral patterns in their Dreamtime stories as the song lines that connect all living beings across time and space through the vibrational frequencies of creation itself. The serpent, vilified in Christian doctrine as the symbol of temptation and fall, reveals its true meaning when we examine its appearance across all spiritual traditions. In Hindu cosmology as Shisha, the cosmic serpent upon which Vishnu rests between creations, in Egyptian mythology as the uraeus serpent worn on the pharaoh's crown to represent awakened consciousness, in Greek mystery schools as the caduceus of Hermes with 2 serpents intertwined around the staff of wisdom, in Aztec religion as Quetzalcoatl the feathered serpent who brings knowledge to humanity, in African traditions as the rainbow serpent that connects earth and sky, and in Norse mythology as Jormungandr the world serpent that encircles the entire cosmos. What were all these cultures trying to tell us? According to the research of ethnobotanist Terence McKenna and neurobiologist Dr. Rick Strassman, the serpent represents the awakened nervous system, the spine and brain transformed through spiritual practice into a conductor of divine energy that can perceive realities normally hidden from ordinary consciousness, which is why the serpent is always associated with wisdom, healing, and the ability to see beyond the veil of physical appearance into the true nature of reality. This is the real meaning of the story in Genesis, not that the serpent tempted humanity into sin, but that it offered the gift of expanded consciousness, the ability to be like God, knowing good and evil, which means transcending the limited perspective of dualistic thinking and perceiving the underlying unity that connects all apparent opposites. The lotus flower, sacred to both Hindu and Buddhist traditions, growing from the mud of earthly existence but blooming in the clear light of spiritual awakening, appears in Egyptian art as the blue lotus used in temple ceremonies to induce mystical states, in Mayan codices as the water lily that represents rebirth and transformation, in Jewish mysticism as the three pillars of the tree of life, in Egyptian pyramids as the perfect geometric form for channeling cosmic energy, and in Native American teepees as the connection between earth and sky, encodes within its three-sided structure the fundamental law of manifestation that the ancient Hermeticists called as above, so below. But why three? According to the Pythagorean teachings preserved by Iamblichus and later revived by Renaissance mages like Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola, the number 3 represents the first stable structure in creation, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, the process by which the divine mind creates reality through the interplay of opposites resolved in a higher unity. The upward-pointing triangle, as taught in the tantric traditions of Kashmir Shaivism by masters like Abhinavagupta and Uppaladeva, represents the masculine principle of consciousness ascending toward spirit, while the downward-pointing triangle represents the feminine principle of energy descending into matter, and when these two triangles intersect they create the six-pointed Star of David, which appears not only in Jewish mysticism but in Hindu mandalas as the Shatkona, in Islamic art as the Seal of Solomon, and in alchemical texts as the union of fire and water, the marriage of opposites that creates the philosopher's stone of enlightened consciousness. The spiral, perhaps the most ancient symbol of all, carved into megalithic stones at Newgrange in Ireland over 5,000 years ago, painted on pottery by the Anasazi peoples of the American Southwest, incorporated into Celtic art as the triple spiral or triskele, found in the double helix of DNA, in the structure of galaxies, in the chambers of the nautilus shell, and in the kundalini serpent that yogis speak of as coiled at the base of the spine, represents what modern physicists in consciousness. Researcher Amit Goswami calls the quantum leap, the way consciousness moves not in straight lines but in evolutionary spirals, always returning to the same issues but at higher levels of understanding and integration. The ancient Chinese understood this as the Tao, the way that flows like water but always moves upward toward greater harmony and balance, while the Aboriginal Australians mapped these spiral patterns in their Dreamtime stories as the song lines that connect all living beings across time and space through the vibrational frequencies of creation itself. The serpent, vilified in Christian doctrine as the symbol of temptation and fall, reveals its true meaning when we examine its appearance across all spiritual traditions. In Hindu cosmology as Shisha, the cosmic serpent upon which Vishnu rests between creations, in Egyptian mythology as the uraeus serpent worn on the pharaoh's crown to represent awakened consciousness, in Greek mystery schools as the caduceus of Hermes with two serpents intertwined around the staff of wisdom, in Aztec religion as Quetzalcoatl the feathered serpent who brings knowledge to humanity, in African traditions as the rainbow serpent that connects earth and sky, and in Norse mythology as Jormungandr the world serpent that encircles the entire cosmos. What were all these cultures trying to tell us? According to the research of ethnobotanist Terence McKenna and neurobiologist Dr. Rick Strassman, the serpent represents the awakened nervous system, the spine and brain transformed through spiritual practice into a conductor of divine energy that can perceive realities normally hidden from ordinary consciousness, which is why the serpent is always associated with wisdom, healing, and the ability to see beyond the veil of physical appearance into the true nature of reality. This is the real meaning of the story in Genesis, not that the serpent tempted humanity into sin, but that it offered the gift of expanded consciousness, the ability to be like God, knowing good and evil, which means transcending the limited perspective of dualistic thinking and perceiving the underlying unity that connects all apparent opposites. The lotus flower, sacred to both Hindu and Buddhist traditions, growing from the mud of earthly existence but blooming in the clear light of spiritual awakening, appears in Egyptian art as the blue lotus used in temple ceremonies to induce mystical states, in Mayan codices as the water lily that represents rebirth and transformation, in Christian iconography as the rose that symbolizes divine love, and even in modern quantum physics as the metaphor that Nobel laureate physicist Erwin Schrödinger used to describe how consciousness emerges from the apparent chaos of quantum probability into the ordered beauty of experienced reality. The eight-petaled lotus specifically, as taught in the tantric system of chakras by masters like Swami Muktananda and Paramahansa Yogananda, represents the heart center where individual consciousness merges with cosmic consciousness, where the limited self dissolves into unlimited love, and where the practitioner discovers that what they thought was their personal energy is actually the same divine energy that moves the stars, grows the plants, and beats the hearts of all living beings. The tree, appearing as Yggdrasil, the world tree in Norse cosmology, as the tree of life in Kabbalistic mysticism, as the Bodhi tree under which Buddha achieved enlightenment, as the cedar of Lebanon sacred to ancient Middle Eastern peoples, as the sacred groves of Celtic Druids, as the tree of souls in Native American vision quests, and as the neural networks of the human brain that modern neuroscience shows us grow and branch in exactly the same patterns as trees in nature, represents what systems theorist Ervin Laszlo calls the Akashic field, the living information system that connects all consciousness across time and space through root-like networks of quantum entanglement that allow information, energy, and awareness to flow instantly between all points in the universe. This is why shamans in every tradition speak of climbing the world tree to reach other dimensions of reality, why Kabbalists meditate on the tree of life to ascend through progressively higher levels of consciousness, and why modern mystics like Eckhart Tolle teach that by connecting with the stillness that exists within our deepest being, we tap into the same timeless awareness that connects all life forms through what he calls the flowering of human consciousness. The sacred mountains that appear in every spiritual tradition, Mount Sinai where Moses received the Ten Commandments, Mount Kailash sacred to both Hindus and Buddhists, Mount Fuji revered by Japanese Shintoists, the sacred peaks of Native American vision quests, the cosmic mountain Meru described in Hindu cosmology, and the stepped pyramids built by cultures worldwide to recreate the mountain's ascent toward heaven, all represent what transpersonal psychologist Ken Wilber calls the spectrum of consciousness, the recognition that awareness exists at many different levels from the gross physical plane through subtle energetic realms to the causal dimension of pure being, and that spiritual development consists of learning to climb this inner mountain by expanding our identity from the limited ego self through progressively more inclusive levels of awareness until we realize our true nature as the unlimited consciousness in which all experience arises and dissolves. The mandala, appearing in Tibetan sand paintings that are destroyed upon completion to teach impermanence, in Native American medicine wheels that map the sacred directions and seasons, in Celtic knot work that weaves infinite patterns with no beginning or end, in Islamic geometric art that reflects the 99 names of Allah, in Hindu yantras that serve as windows into cosmic consciousness, and in the neurological research of Carl Jung, who discovered that his patients spontaneously drew mandala patterns during psychological healing, represents what physicist David Bohm called the implicate order, the hidden wholeness that underlies all apparent fragmentation and separation, the recognition that every part contains the pattern of the whole just as each cell in our body contains the DNA blueprint for the entire organism. This is why meditation masters in every tradition teach their students to visualize or contemplate mandalas, not as pretty pictures, but as training devices that help consciousness recognize its own fundamental nature as the aware space in which all experience appears, the unchanging witness that remains present through all the changes of thought, emotion, sensation, and perception. The flame, sacred to Zoroastrians as the eternal fire that must never be extinguished, to Hindus as the divine light of Brahman that illuminates all consciousness, to Christians as the tongues of fire that descended upon the apostles at Pentecost, to Jews as the eternal flame that burned in the Temple of Jerusalem, to indigenous peoples as the sacred fire around which wisdom is shared, and to modern mystics as the inner light that meditation reveals within the heart of being, represents what? The great Advaita master Nisargadatta Maharaj called the I Am, the pure sense of existing that remains constant through all the changing contents of experience, the light of awareness itself that makes all perception possible, the consciousness that is not just something we have but what we fundamentally are at the deepest level of our being. The I, appearing as the Eye of Horus in ancient Egyptian temples, as the third eye of Shiva in Hindu iconography, as the all-seeing eye on the American dollar bill, as the evil eye protection amulets found throughout Middle Eastern and Mediterranean cultures, as the eye in the center of Buddhist Dharma wheels, and as the mystical eye that opens during deep meditation according to practitioners in every contemplative tradition, represents what cognitive scientist Douglas Hofstadter calls the strange loop of consciousness, the mysterious way that awareness can observe itself, that consciousness can be both the subject that perceives and the object that is perceived, creating the recursive feedback loops that generate self-awareness, free will, and the capacity for enlightenment that distinguishes human consciousness from ordinary matter and energy. The hand, appearing as the hand of Fatima in Islamic culture, as the Hamsa in Jewish tradition, as the madras of Buddhist and Hindu practice, as the handprints left by shamans in sacred caves, as the healing hands depicted in Christian art, and as the precise hand positions that modern energy healers use to direct life force, represents what neuroscientist V.S. Ramachandran calls the extended mind, the recognition that consciousness doesn't end at the boundary of our skin, but extends through our hands into the world, allowing us to feel, shape, bless, heal, and transform reality through the focused intention that flows through these most sensitive and skillful parts of our physical being. The water, sacred to every spiritual tradition as the source and sustainer of all life, appearing in Christian baptism as death and rebirth, in Hindu puja as the offering that purifies and blesses, in Islamic ablutions that prepare the soul for prayer, in Jewish mikveh rituals that mark spiritual transformation, in Native American sweat lodges that cleanse body and spirit, in Taoist teachings as the softest element that overcomes the hardest obstacles, and in modern consciousness research as the medium that carries memory and information throughout our bodies and the planet itself, represents what biologist Rupert Sheldrake calls morphic resonance, the idea that water molecules can hold and transmit patterns of information across vast distances of space and time, which explains how healing springs maintain their therapeutic properties for centuries, how homeopathic remedies work even when diluted beyond the possibility of any physical molecules remaining, and how the water in our bodies, which makes up over 70% of our physical form, can be programmed through intention, prayer, and spiritual practice to carry healing frequencies that transform not only our own consciousness but the consciousness of everyone we encounter. The sun, worshipped by ancient Egyptians as Ra, the source of all life, by Aztecs as the god who demanded sacrifice to ensure cosmic renewal, by Hindus as Surya whose light illuminates both outer world and inner wisdom, by Native Americans as Grandfather Sun whose journey across the sky marks the passage of sacred time, by ancient Greeks as Apollo the god of music, poetry, and divine illumination, and by modern mystics as the perfect symbol of enlightened consciousness that shines equally on all beings without judgment or preference, represents what physicist Amit Goswami calls the creative universe, the recognition that consciousness is not produced by matter but is the fundamental ground of being from which matter, energy, space, and time emerge, just as the light of the sun is not produced by the objects it illuminates but is the prior condition that makes all perception and life possible. The moon, revered by ancient peoples as the divine feminine principle that governs cycles of birth, death, and renewal, appearing in Islamic crescents as the light that guides travelers through dark nights, in Hindu iconography as the crown jewel of Shiva that represents the mind transformed by spiritual practice, in Celtic traditions as the triple goddess who embodies maiden, mother, and crone aspects of feminine wisdom, In Chinese medicine as the yin energy that balances the yang force of solar consciousness, and in modern shamanic practices as the power that opens doorways to other dimensions during specific lunar phases, represents what depth psychologist Clarissa Pinkola Estes calls the wild woman archetype, the intuitive, instinctual, cyclical wisdom that has been systematically suppressed by patriarchal cultures but which modern women and men are rediscovering as essential for psychological wholeness and spiritual maturity. The star, appearing as the Star of David in Jewish mysticism, as the five-pointed pentagram in ancient Mesopotamian astronomy, as the eight-pointed Star of Ishtar in Babylonian religion, as the North Star that guides travelers in indigenous traditions, as the Star of Bethlehem in Christian nativity stories, as the stars and crescents of Islamic flags, and as the inner light that meditation masters describe as visible during deep states of absorption, represents what cosmologist Brian Swemm calls the universe story, the recognition that the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and other elements that make up our bodies were literally forged in the nuclear furnaces of dying stars billions of years ago, which means that we are not separate from the cosmos but are the cosmos becoming conscious of itself, the universe awakening to its own divine nature through the miracle of human awareness. These symbols, soul traveler, are not just ancient artifacts or religious decorations, they are technologies of consciousness, precise instructions for awakening that our ancestors encoded in forms so simple that a child could draw them, yet so profound that lifetimes of study cannot exhaust their meaning. When we trace the cross with our finger, we are aligning our energy field with the fundamental structure of reality itself. When we gaze upon the mandala, we are training our consciousness to recognize its own infinite nature. When we contemplate the lotus, we are programming our awareness to transform every difficulty into wisdom, every obstacle into an opportunity for greater compassion and understanding. The secret that connects all religious symbols across every tradition is this: they are mirrors that reflect back to us our own divine nature, which is why the most sacred symbol in every tradition ultimately points beyond itself to the consciousness that perceives it, the awareness in which all symbols appear and disappear like waves rising and falling in the ocean of being. The early Christian desert fathers like John Cassian and Evagrius Ponticus understood this when they developed the practice of contemplating sacred images not as objects of worship but as doorways that open the heart to direct experience of divine love. The Sufi masters like Ibn Arabi and Al-Hallaj used geometric patterns and Arabic calligraphy as support for meditation that dissolved the boundaries between lover and beloved, seeker and sought. The Hindu tantrics created yantras as precise maps for navigating inner worlds during advanced states of samadhi. The Buddhist monks painted thankas as three-dimensional windows into enlightened consciousness that could transport the viewer into the same state of realization depicted in the art. The Jewish Kabbalists meditated on Hebrew letters as living forces that participated in the ongoing creation of reality. The Islamic mystics saw in geometric patterns the mathematical precision of divine will manifesting through infinite creativity while maintaining perfect unity and balance. What modern neuroscience is now discovering through brain imaging technology was already known by these ancient mystics, that contemplating sacred symbols literally rewires the neural networks of the brain, creating new pathways for processing reality that bypass the ordinary ego mind and allow direct access to what Dr. Andrew Newberg calls enlightenment states, where the sense of separate self dissolves into oceanic unity with all existence. This is why pilgrims travel thousands of miles to stand before sacred symbols carved in temples, why meditation masters spend years learning to visualize complex mandalas in perfect detail, why indigenous shamans paint their bodies with specific geometric patterns before ceremony, why cathedrals and mosques are designed according to precise mathematical ratios that induce altered states of consciousness in all who enter. They understood that symbols are not just representations of spiritual truths but actual tools for transformation that can lift human consciousness from ordinary awareness into direct experience of the sacred. The deeper secret, known only to initiates in the inner mysteries of every tradition, is that these symbols exist not just in art and architecture but are continuously being written by consciousness itself in the energy field that surrounds every living being, what ancient seers called the aura, what modern science calls the biofield, what mystics in every age have described as the light body that extends far beyond the physical form and contains within its luminous structure the same sacred geometries that appear in temples, mandalas, and holy books throughout history. This is why advanced practitioners in every tradition speak of seeing symbols appearing spontaneously during deep meditation or prayer, the cross of light that appears in the heart center during Christian contemplation, the thousand-petaled lotus that blooms at the crown during Hindu samadhi, the clear light mandala that emerges during Tibetan dream yoga, the tree of life that grows from the root center upward through all the chakras during Kabbalistic meditation. These are not hallucinations or imagination but direct perceptions of the consciousness-created patterns that are always present but normally invisible to ordinary awareness. When Jesus spoke of the kingdom of heaven being within, when Buddha pointed to the Buddha nature that exists in every being, when Lao Tzu described the Tao that cannot be named but flows through all existence, when Rumi sang of the beloved that is closer than our own breath, they were pointing to the same recognition, that the source of all sacred symbols is the consciousness that we are, the divine awareness that expresses itself through infinite creativity while remaining forever unchanged, like the space in which all symbols appear but which is itself never limited by any form it contains. This is the ultimate meaning behind every religious symbol. They are calling cards from our own deepest nature, reminders written in the universal language of consciousness to help us remember who we really are beneath all the layers of conditioning, belief, and identification with temporary forms. The Christian mystic Meister Eckhart expressed this beautifully when he wrote that the eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me. The consciousness that creates the symbol and the consciousness that perceives the symbol are not two different things but one seamless awareness expressing itself as both creator and creation, artist and artwork, the divine mind playing hide-and-seek with itself across all cultures and centuries. If this journey into the hidden meaning behind every religious symbol resonated with your soul, share this wisdom with fellow seekers and join our community of truth explorers in the comments below. Let us know which symbol spoke most directly to your spirit and what insights emerged as you contemplated these ancient technologies of awakening. For the path of remembrance is walked together by souls who recognize in each other the same divine light that shines through every sacred form. Thank you, soul traveler, for joining this exploration into the mysteries that unite all spiritual traditions in their recognition of the one consciousness that wears the masks of many symbols but is itself the formless awareness in which all forms appear and disappear like dreams in the mind of God.